The mechanism was rusted shut. Leather straps held the bone in place. He had not opened his mouth in a decade. The anomaly began with a clerical error in Frankfurt. In August 1957, a claims adjuster named Arthur Webb was cross-referencing payout ledgers when he noticed a statistical impossibility. A single policyholder in Perry County had claimed 6 accidental death benefits in 13 years. The beneficiary was always the same. The cause of death was always agricultural misadventure. Webb pulled the physical files. The payouts were small, barely enough to cover a funeral and a season's supplies, keeping them below the threshold for mandatory fraud investigation. The policyholder was listed as Elmer Whitaker. The signature on the 1944 claim was firm and bold. By 1956, the signature was a frantic, jagged scrawl, as if the hand holding the pen had forgotten how to write. Webb contacted the Perry County Sheriff's Office on a Thursday. Sheriff Harding took the call. He knew the Whitaker place. It was a 90-acre steading at the end of a washed-out timber road, isolated by geography and reputation. The locals didn't go there. They said the soil was sour and the air in the hollow sat heavy on your chest, like a wet wool blanket. Harding pulled the county death certificates to match Webb's list. 6 men, all transients, all hired as seasonal hands, all dead within 3 weeks of arrival. The causes of death read like a catalog of farming hazards: entangled in a thresher, crushed by a tractor, fall from a silo, asphyxiation in a grain bin. The pattern was too clean. In every case, the coroner had noted accidental based on the scene. But looking at the photos spread across his desk, Harding saw something else. The men didn't look like they had been working. They looked like they had collapsed before the machinery touched them. Their hands were unclenched, their faces were slack. On September 9th, 1957, Sheriff Harding assembled a team. 2 deputies, a state police investigator, and the county coroner. They drove out to the hollow in a convoy of black sedans that looked out of place against the dying autumn foliage. The road was overgrown, the branches slapping against the windshields like warning hands. The Whitaker farmhouse was a 2-story structure that seemed to be sinking into the earth. The porch listed dangerously to the left. The windows were dark, covered in decades of grime. There was no livestock in the fields. The barn stood silent, its doors hanging open like a broken jaw. The only sound was the wind rattling the dry corn stalks. As the officers stepped out of their vehicles, the front door opened. Opal Whitaker stepped onto the porch. She stood barely 4 feet in height. Her growth had arrested during early development, leaving her with a diminutive frame but the weathered, leathered face of a woman in her 50s. She held a paring knife in one hand and a potato in the other. She didn't ask why they were there. She didn't look at the badges or the guns. She simply pointed the knife toward the front door and said, "He's upstairs. He hasn't come down since the war." Her voice was flat, mechanical, stripped of any cadence or emotion. She went back to peeling the potato, the skin curling away in a single unbroken strip. Harding left a deputy with Opal and entered the house. The smell hit him instantly. It wasn't the smell of death, but of life gone stagnant. Stale air, unwashed linens, and the sweet, cloying scent of sickness. The hallway was narrow, piled high with newspapers and canning jars. The floorboards groaned under his weight. The stairs were reinforced. Harding noted fresh lumber nailed over the original treads. Crude bracing added to support immense weight. The handrail had been removed. The wall rubbed smooth and greasy where something wide had dragged against it repeatedly. The air grew hotter as they ascended, the smell thickening into something physical. The door to the master bedroom was missing. In its place hung a heavy canvas tarp, stained dark at the bottom. Harding pushed it aside with his nightstick. The room was dominated by a bed that had been modified with cinder blocks and timber. And on the bed lay Elmer Whitaker. The man was a biological mountain, a quarter-ton of tissue spread across the mattress, his legs atrophied and fused in a permanent bend. He was propped up on stained pillows, his skin pale and stretched thin from 13 years without sunlight. He wore a nightshirt that had been slit up the back. He looked at the sheriff with eyes that were terrified and alert. Elmer didn't speak. He couldn't. His jaw was wired shut, a crude, rusted mechanism of baling wire and leather straps holding his mouth in a fixed position. A small gap had been left for a straw or a spoon. Harding signaled the coroner. This wasn't just a sickbed. It was a containment unit. The search of the room began. On the bedside table, they found a stack of insurance forms. Pen pressure analysis would later confirm that Elmer's hand had been forced, literally guided by another, to sign the documents. But it was the food tray that drew the coroner's attention. A bowl of untouched stew sat on the nightstand. The coroner dipped a finger into the cold broth and rubbed it against his thumb. It was gritty. He brought it to his nose. The scent of bitter almonds was faint but unmistakable beneath the gravy. Arsenic. Enough to fell a horse, let alone a man who couldn't stand. Check the mattress, Harding ordered. It took 4 men to lift Elmer. He made a low, rasping sound as they moved him, a vibration of pure distress. They slid him onto a canvas stretcher, his body compliant and soft. Beneath him, the mattress was stained and molded to his shape. Harding took a knife and slashed the ticking of the mattress. He reached into the stuffing. His hand closed around a sheaf of papers. He pulled them out. 6 life insurance policies, each one stained with sweat and bodily fluids. Each one representing a man who had come to the farm looking for work and found only a calculated end. The dates on the policies matched the deaths perfectly. 1944, 1946, 1949. The system was simple. Opal would hire a drifter. She would take out a policy on him, claiming it was standard for dangerous farm work. Then she would begin the conditioning. Downstairs, the deputy found the pantry. It was stocked, not with food, but with chemistry. Tins of rodenticide, jars of unlabeled powder, a mortar and pestle stained with white residue. Opal had been brewing death in the kitchen, measuring out doses like flour for a cake. The investigation reconstructed the timeline. Opal managed the farm. Opal managed the accidents. Elmer was the face, the signatory, the husband whose name was on the deed. But somewhere along the line, he had tried to stop. He had refused to sign. That was when the wire went on. The medical examiner found scarring around Elmer's jaw, indicating the restraints had been in place for years. He was a prisoner in his own flesh, kept alive solely to provide a valid signature for the insurance company. They found the ledger in the kitchen drawer, nestled among recipe cards. It listed names, dates, amounts. and next to each a dosage chart. 3 grains, dizziness. 5 grains, loss of balance. 7 grains, ataxia. She had been testing the poison on them, weakening them until they couldn't walk straight. A man who can't keep his balance is a liability near a thresher. A man who is dizzy falls easily from a silo. Opal didn't push them. She didn't have to. She simply poisoned them enough to let gravity and machinery do the rest. It was workplace negligence weaponized into murder. Back upstairs, they moved the bed frame. Beneath it, scratched into the floorboards, with what looked like a fingernail, were tally marks. 6 clusters of scratches. Elmer had been keeping count. He had watched every season as a new man arrived, knowing exactly what was coming. The coroner examined Elmer's hands. His right hand, the signing hand, was bruised and battered. The fingers had been broken and healed crookedly multiple times. Evidence of correction when the pen didn't move fast enough. Outside, the team checked the machinery. The thresher in the barn was clean, but the gears showed signs of bleaching. Someone had scrubbed the biological material away with lye. The tractor tires were new, replaced after the 1953 accident. Opal remained on the porch throughout the raid. When Harding finally came out, carrying the sheaf of policies in an evidence bag, she didn't look up. "He has to eat soft food," she said. "Make sure they know. He chokes if it ain't mashed." It took a crane truck from the highway department to remove Elmer from the 2nd floor. They had to cut a hole in the exterior wall. The image of the massive man being lowered in a sling, blinking in the harsh sunlight he hadn't seen in a decade, made the front page of the Lexington Herald. Elmer Whitaker died 3 weeks later in the county hospital. His heart, strained by years of immobility and stress, simply stopped. He never spoke a word to the investigators. He took the details of those 13 years to his grave. But the autopsy revealed one final horror. Elmer's blood tested positive for trace amounts of arsenic. Small doses, just enough to keep him weak, just enough to keep him in that bed. She hadn't just been poisoning the hired hands. She had been managing her husband's vitality like a resource. The house was searched for 3 days. In the cellar, they found the personal effects of the men: wallets, belt buckles, letters home that were never mailed. Opal had kept them in a pickling jar, preserved in vinegar, trophies of her efficiency. The logic of the operation was terrifying in its pragmatism. Elmer was too heavy to work the farm. Opal was too small. They needed money. They needed help. The hired hands provided the labor for the season and the capital for the winter. It was a self-sustaining cycle of exploitation. Opal Whitaker was charged with 6 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. During her trial, she sat on a stack of phone books to see over the defense table. She pleaded not guilty. She claimed the men were careless. She claimed Elmer was sick. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Opal was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in the women's penitentiary at Pewee Valley. She died there in 1964. The other inmates said she was a model prisoner, quiet and industrious in the kitchen. The farmhouse stood empty for a year before it burned down in 1958. The cause was listed as electrical, but there was no electricity in the hollow. The locals said it was the only way to clean the ground. Sheriff Harding kept the jar of personal effects in his office for years. trying to trace the families of the victims. He managed to return 3 wallets. The rest remained in evidence, unclaimed. The bodies of the 6 men were exhumed from the paupers section of the county cemetery. Toxicology confirmed high levels of arsenic in the hair and bone of all 6. The accidents were merely the final blow. They were dead men walking long before they hit the ground. The insurance companies changed their policies regarding unverified rural deaths shortly after the Whitaker case. They called it the Perry County Clause. It required a physician's autopsy for any agricultural accident claim over $500. What haunts the records isn't just the greed, it's the biology. A woman too small to lift a bale of hay, and a man too large to leave his bed, conspiring to consume the healthy, able-bodied men who came to help them. It was a predation of the weak upon the strong. The 6 policies found under the mattress totaled $12,000, a fortune in the hollow, but not a cent of it was ever spent. They found the cash in coffee cans buried in the root cellar. They didn't kill for survival, they killed for the hoard. Today the hollow is overgrown, the road is gone. Nature has reclaimed the site of the Whitaker farm. But if you look at the county records, you can still see the signatures on those 6 claims. The first one is strong, legible, human. The last one is a jagged, desperate scrawl, a seismograph of a soul under extreme duress. It serves as the only testimony Elmer Whitaker ever gave. A documented descent into a hell where the only way to stay alive was to sign your name to someone else's death.